Good afternoon, Mark Kelly. I live in Hampton, Virginia. This is my 1981 HJ47 Land Cruiser Troop Carrier Troopy from Australia. Let me show you around. We'll start in the back. Kind of some trivia and history there. This is the remnants of the Trakka vans, camper conversions. This was kind of one of their original startup efforts where they would bring these vehicles, obviously from Japan, to their factory in Australia, and they would take the brand new vehicle and cut the top off, and because they wanted to, well, as the name implies, do a van conversion for the people who lived in the outback. And since they lived in the outback, and they didn't just live in the outback, they were gone from home for several days, very often mustering cattle. They refer to as mustering. We might refer to it as something else. So they would build these out, and the people who worked out in the outback, sometimes 3 to 5 days. My experience has been they would stay out there 3 to 5 days, and they had their sink, their stove, their propane, their fridge, everything they needed, a couple days, bedding up top. And so then they'd come back into town and restock their diesel tanks, their propane, their water, their groceries, etc., and go back out following days. A couple unique things about this. I've tried to keep it as original as possible. These are original split rims, which are obviously we've gone away from in terms of modern technology. Because they're a little bit to work with when you're changing a tire. More importantly, putting a new tire on one of these. Not every tire shop would like to mess with them, because if you don't know what you're doing, you could easily hurt a finger or worse. The original owner in Australia did an unbelievable job of putting anti-rust over the entire vehicle. You'll see spots in here where you can see the tan paint. That's just because a rock has kicked off of the tire and knock some of the anti-rust on. But that anti-rust is 41 years old, and it's covers the entire vehicle in areas you wouldn't think it would be anti-rust. When I work on the vehicle, I pull a panel. There's usually a real thick coat of anti-rust all over the vehicle, and so it's held up in those respects out there. I just keep tools and recovery gear in a small locker there. That's all that's essentially for. And then in terms of the engine, it's an HJ47, which means it has a H engine, in this case a 2H engine. Yeah, the only mod that you'll see is the small ARB air compressor to be able to deflate and then inflate tires. And also there's an air locker that comes off of that air compressor. Besides that, it is a stock original 2H engine. And a lot of people tend to put a turbo on here to go over 55 miles per hour. I prefer to keep it stock, and you spend a lot of time in the right lane. These are really common in Australia. It's referred to as a roo bar, to bump any kangaroos out of the way that you might need to, because they'll do quite a bit of damage, especially a big red up in Northern Territory and Northern Queensland. They get to be rather large animals that will not only damage the vehicle but damage the people inside if it kicks over the hood. So that. And then the standard lift jack and shovel we prefer not to use, but they're there in case we either have below average judgment or below average driving skills. Being in the U.S. Air Force, I did an exchange tour in Australia a little over 20 years ago. Spent a lot of time in the Queensland and Northern Territory, and then fell in love with these vehicles, just the sight of them, because they're all over, especially in the outback. They work them hard, and they do a good job, and that's why you see so many Land Cruisers out and about in the outback. The other story behind the story is I actually own two. And the reason I own two is because my wife won't let me own three. Power outlets in case you want to hook in your fridge or etc. That's just tied to the battery. And then over here, they're designed to go long range and long time. And so what they did as far as the van conversion, they added a second diesel tank and they added a water tank, and all that stuff works like a champ. This cabinetry and table and overhead, obviously bedding up here. The bed comes out further. I assume I'm going to knock my head on it every time I climbed in. But storage for bedding, 40 years ago, it was quite all right in terms of safety to have your propane and your stove inside. So it's still in here, even though I obviously don't use propane inside, especially if there's anybody else going to be in here. Sink, which drains out, and then the alternator under the hood, besides recharging the battery under the hood, recharges an AGM battery there just to the side that I run the fridge off of. This cord is Australian power type outlet, and I can run the fridge off either that old Australian outlet or I can plug into the good old US of A 110, 120 volt out there. And so this battery under here is an AGM battery that'll run for 2-3 days, and I just use the Goal Zero for charging my phone like I'm doing now. And although we don't need the tools, we take tools with us because it is a 40-year-old vehicle, and every now and then there's a bolt that needs to be tightened. The other thing which I didn't mention is at the Trakka van factory, they sew and make these curtains, and these are the original curtains that came with it. And so a whole lot of stuff in here is a little over 40 years old, and you should never trust a vehicle that's not old enough to vote. I hope you enjoyed the walk around the 1981 HJ47 hobby project and love. I have an Instagram account, Troopy Trek, and you'll notice on that site there's 2 of them, and they look like sisters. Only thing different is the engine and a few other tidbits. And so have a great day here at Overland Expo.